Hey guys, Govin here back with another Lost Sword video. Today is going to be looking at some of the units who I would like to see buffed in the upcoming kind of balance adjustment since the devs announced in the previous dev note that they have plans on buffing certain units who have fallen out of the meta. So I was just going to go over a few of the units I would like to see included in that list and maybe give some ideas on what I think they could do. So to be honest, I think this top two rows is probably fine. I would say maybe Lohengrin can do with a little bit of a buff. I think she's still a very strong unit. I called her the best unit in the game. Like it feels like maybe a month and a bit ago, but I think the recent DPS have kind of overshadowed her a bit in terms of numbers because I think Morgan, Loera, and Nesha all do more damage than her, which is kind of crazy because her damage output before was already insane, and now you have three units who are basically out DPSing her. So I think she could do with a little bit of a buff. I don't think it's necessarily like she doesn't need much in her kit. I think you could either increase the actual damage of her basic attacks, or you could increase the uptime. Because I think right now her ult only lasts for 12 seconds, right? And it's on a 30-second cooldown, so maybe you can make that 18, 20 seconds, and I think that would be more than enough for her. Next unit I wanted to cover is Merlin because I think Merlin is in a bit of a weird spot because she like she does, of course she's a great support. I think Merlin is still the best support for the Wizard team in the early game because its crit chance is like it's a hard stat to come by when you first start the game, but I think the later you go, as you get more crit on these characters, it becomes you more want the stat books. Because like if you compare her to Asteria, who's basically her replacement, so Merlin gives you the 15% attack. Meanwhile, Asteria gives you 70% magic attack, and she gives you the debuff on her ultimate, which is 25% additional damage taken from wizards. And I think that's gonna overshadow the crit chance in the late game. So for me, that's why I value Asteria more than Merlin, especially in raid content, because I think that's where Asteria really shines, and I think she by far overshadows Merlin in that piece of content. So I think Merlin, you could maybe do like either make. I'm not sure if they could increase the crit chance because 15 is already a lot. Because I think the highest you see in the game is 15, even for like a personal buff. So maybe you could give her a magic attack buff or a similar debuff to Asteria, but then you could also make the argument that you would have way too overlapping overall. So maybe I think you could focus in on like the CC aspect of her kit, for example, and make it so she freezes more often. Make this defense reduction higher, so it's like higher, maybe like a 10% debuff, and it's 100% uptime. So that would be great. But yeah, I think Merlin is in a bit of a tough spot because obviously Asteria is a relatively new character, so it would be weird if right after Asteria came out, like maybe a month and a bit ago, they decide to bring Merlin straight back into the team. Honestly, kind of a similar scenario for Tiamat, who for a long time was the most dominant DPS in the game, by far our DPS because she had basically four self buffs in her kit, and yeah, 20% crit, 88 crit damage, and then 88% attack and 50% ignore damage reduction. So she was just stacking buffs to infinity, and then her skills would do an insane amount of damage. And to be honest, I think main thing she needs is numbers. Maybe make this higher uptime so her active skill can do more damage. I think she just needs numbers to be honest, because I think her kit is fine, her buffs are fine. It's just maybe her numbers are weaker than other units. But to be honest, I wouldn't even buff Tiamat because I think there are units who are struggling far more than she is. So I would just leave Tiamat alone. I think she had her time to shine. I think there's some units who had a lot shorter time to shine who could use some help. One of my buffs lists I think would be Isolde because I think she's like an early game monster where you of course you need like a proper healer in the early game because I don't think Neo Bedivere is that good early on. But then I think she falls off a cliff because especially when you've seen Luera, who you could say heals just as much, if not maybe a little bit less, but does 100 times more damage. Like, why would you ever choose to use Isolde over Loera? So I think Isolde either needs to be like when you use her, your team is pretty much immortal, or she needs to have some buff upside. And I would prefer they went for like a buff upside because I think in these kind of games, you being a healer, like just a healer, is never good enough. I think they need to have some kind of upside offensively as well. So maybe like give her a buff, like when she heals someone, she increases their attack by X amount, or increases their ignore damage reduction by X amount. Something like that along those lines, I think would be cool. Most of the units are fine. I think Isabel is great. Very nice defensive utility unit. I think K is another case where she just needs a numbers increase because I think she's kind of getting overshadowed damage. I like her kit a lot. I think she just needs numbers. Similar thing with Summer Mary. She has been buffed before to increase her numbers, but I think she needs more because if the boss is not fire, she's not doing any damage. But you could also make the argument that maybe that's maybe that's fair enough. Maybe that's like her use case scenario is if it's a fire boss, Summer Mary will be useful. If it's not, she won't be useful. And now the buff I would like the most is Lisa. Probably my favorite design in the game next to Ran. I think Lisa is like the best looking character in the game. And I think, to be honest, I think when they made Lisa, she was like the first unit where it's like attack speed is the go-to stat, and then they made Lohengrin, who pretty much overshadowed her in all aspects, and she's the same element as her, so it was like a straight up upgrade. But I would like to see Lisa get like I want them to make it so she maybe has some synergy with Nesha because obviously Nesha's card increases the damage of ranges. So maybe like make this attack speed buff team wide, for example, or you could reduce it and make it team wide, make it so she increases basic attack damage for the whole team. That kind of thing is what I would like to see because she is pretty much just a worse version of Lohengrin, worse version of Nesha, and I don't think just a numbers buff, unless it's like a really big increase in her numbers, would be good enough personally. And I think another issue with the is her card. I think could use a change because like this healing reduction thing I mean, I get it's supposed to be like a downside, but I feel like they could just give her another buff here, like maybe increases basic attack damage by 20%, 15%, something like that. Because the stat, obviously, the base stats are fine. Changing it to her basic attack to 3 targets is fine. Although I'm not sure how that interacts with like focus or target. Like mean she can hit the whole team, as in like she's getting an increase of 6. I'm not sure. I would need to check and test that. But yeah, I would love to see Lisa buffed. Um, Similar thing with Rhea. I think Rhea is another unit that's very, very good in the early game, but I have been using her a bit more in the late game. But like this, for example, I think you could easily make this like a team wide buff. Of course, you would need to reduce the potency, but maybe like make this HP and defense and increase it for the whole team. Because obviously she's a very unique unit where she has basically 3 buff skills or 4 buff skills even, because her ultimate is a buff skill as well. I think you'd also do like change this from attack to damage, additional damage, and increase the uptime because 10 seconds every 28 seconds is very, very low. Because you can pretty much barely fit in the four like your other 4 teammates' ultimates. So I would like to see this increased, maybe 15 seconds. That would be nice. Um, and then to be honest, I think there are a lot of units that could do with some help. Like just off the screen, like if I scroll down, even just here, I think every unit on the screen right now could do with a buff. Whether it's a small buff in cases like I think I don't think Lua needs much to be honest. I think she just needs to like hone in on her shock identity to benefit Ran and Eva. But honestly, there are so many units who need a buff, but I would prefer rather I want them to target units that are like on the cusp. Like Lisa is on the cusp of being good again. Anessa is on the cusp of being good again. I would rather they target those kind of units than like units who are like Percival, who is like completely used, like not used. I would rather they do that than, and then think of units like Percival, Tristan, Lucy as more long-term projects. But in the short term, I want them to buff like units that are on the cusp. But yeah, this was just giving an idea of like units I think could do with a buff, and I might do a similar thing with pets. I'm not sure, but yeah. See you guys in